welcome to another exciting episode of the Religious Studies Project. My name's Christopher Cotter, and I'm joined today, as ever, by
David Robertson, and the audience, and you, the listener.
Exactly. We're brought to you, as ever, by the British Association for the Study of Religions and the North American Association for the Study of Religions. And it's been a real cracking start to our 2016-2017 academic year. And the interview we had a couple of weeks ago with Temu Taura went down very well. We've had a veritable perfect storm of responses to that. And last week's interview that David did with Grace Davey has also received significantly more hits than usual. So we're really excited about that. This week's another interview that David's recorded, this time with Milda Alisauskiene on religion and religious studies in Lithuania. I think that's the best way to describe it.
Yeah, and I'll pass over to me.
Hello, I'm here again today in Helsinki at the EASR conference, and this afternoon I'm joined by Milda Alisauskiene from Vytautas Magnus University in Vilnius, Lithuania. She is an associate professor in the sociology department, and we are going to be talking today about the religious field in Lithuania and religious studies in Lithuania. So, Milda, first of all, welcome to the Religious Studies Project.
Thanks. Hello. Hi.
We've been hoping to have you on for a while now, so glad to finally do it. Perhaps you could begin by telling our audience a little bit about the situation in Lithuania historically and the Soviet issue.
Yes. Well, talking about the contemporary religious situation in Lithuania, it is really very relevant to go back to history. And if we go back, first of all, we have first step back, it would be the declarance of independence in early 90s. Before that, there was a Soviet occupation period for more than 50 years. And before that, in between two world wars, Lithuania had also independent republic. And so many things that we see now, we must see within this socio-historical context, what happened before. And particularly, for instance, the role of religion in contemporary society. Yeah. So returning to what happened within the historical periods that I mentioned, I would say that first of all, during Soviet regime period, we had the secularization or forced secularization of religion, which manifested mainly through the forced withdrawal of religion from public sphere. This does not mean, though, that religion disappeared from individual and private lives of individuals. But within the public sphere, definitely we can see that religion was not there. When we approach the organizational level, we can see that during Soviet times, many religious communities have lost their property. The clergy and the education, the system of education of clergy was destroyed. Mm-hmm. So there was a discontinuity in many activities of many religious communities. Lithuania was mainly Roman Catholic since the times of Counter-Reformation, and Roman Catholic Church was dominant religion, and during the First Republic, as we call it, in between the First and Second World War, Roman Catholic Church played a very important role then. Roman Catholic Church participated within national awakening movement in the late 19th century. It it participated in the nation building process, and thus became a very important part of the national identity. And during the Republic times, the First Republic times, Roman Catholic Church also was an active agent within public life, and this meant that, for instance, priests were also sometimes officers of the state. You know, they they were having posts within government offices, and they were able to make decisions on behalf of all religions
Yes, okay.
within state. So things changed after the Second World War and the Soviet occupation after the.
Can I get you to go back to things changed after just because of that?
Because it was it's very, very noisy.
Thank you.
So things changed after the independence was again declared in early 90s. On one side, because the church clergy was not appointed anymore, and the idea of religious pluralism was more or less taken as it is in many Western democracy countries, as it looks like, But on the other hand, I would say that there is a continuous kind of social memory of Roman Catholic Church being a very, very important part of national identity and of public life.
That's interesting. I mean, that's a very similar situation in Poland, for instance, where you have this very strong cultural identity with Catholicism, which is, of course, so different to the way that it is in the more sort of Protestant kind of countries, where most of the sociology of religion comes from, let's face it. Yeah. But I'm wondering if, like Poland, there was the particular form of Catholicism quite loosely adhered to. Although you have the very strong cultural identification. In Poland, for instance, there are a lot of folk practices. It's a very vernacular form of Catholicism. Is it similar in Lithuania?
I would say, although it's different from Polish because of when you see that it's related also to cultural identity. Poles are it's a Slavonic nation, and Lithuanians have different. The language is different, and we have in Lithuania some different cultural aspects might be visible. So I would like to make a difference between Polish Catholicism and Lithuanian Catholicism, and you can see particularly these differences. For instance, even in Lithuania, if you go to Vilnius region, which is mainly inhabited by Poles, and then you go to other parts of the country which are inhabited by Lithuanians, so you can see those differences. Poles are much more pious.
Yes.
Yeah, they are more religious. They are more going to more frequently attending the church. They have also these very colorful lived religion symbols,
indeed,
which in Lithuania are by Lithuanians were not so much adopted. Lithuanians are more Lithuanian Catholicism symbolism, I would say, is more manifested through different wooden carved sculptures, figures, and or the, for instance, metal suns with crosses, that are used widely on the countrysides, for instance. So this symbolism is different.
Yeah.
And I think also that during Soviet times, the impact of Soviet times for Roman Catholic Church, both in Lithuania and in Poland, was a bit different too. Because Lithuania, as you know, was one of the republic of the Soviet Union. So that meant that the country was depending very much on the Moscow. And it was really, in a sense, closer to the ideal of communist whatever vision they had of the society
and
than
so the
Poland.
Secularism was much more firmly enforced.
Yes, I would say so. Meanwhile, in Poland, they could have first of all they had more kind of individualistic lifestyle. They had in many cases more vivid rural lifestyle, and where the religious life might be more alive there.
Was there in Lithuania then any kind of sort of religious underground during the Soviet era? And I mean, either whether we're talking about Catholicism or more vernacular forms or whatever, was this stuff going on under the surface?
Oh, sure, yeah. There was a Roman Catholic Church Chronicle that was published, and it was a publishing in the underground.
Right.
Yeah.
Right,
So people were printing it at home with their small machines.
Yeah.
So, and they were sharing among themselves how it was actually the history and the documents that were collected in those chronicles, showing how the Soviet state oppressed the church. It was like a collection of documents, and evidences showing that we are oppressed. At the same time, there were priests who were taken to the prisons, because of their activities. Some of the priests were really very persecuted, and they were not able to freely speak during their sermons. Everybody was aware at that time that during the masses, someone is coming from the authorities to observe what's going on. At the same time, I would say that what's interesting from my field of research, that I can see that minority religions also they lived their life. They lived their religious life. They were meeting in the apartments. They were meeting in the underground, and they kept their activities. Though state authorities were trying to reorganize some of the religious organizations. For instance, there were attempts to join Baptists with Pentecostals. For instance, the Soviet authorities thought that there is no need to have two registered religious organizations, that they can be joined, for whatever reason. But this, of course, made some confusion in those communities. So they rather decided then not to go against it because it was not possible, but rather to stay in more underground activities and keep on going with their religious practices and rituals.
Indeed. And when you talk about minority religions, there, are we talking about both kind of what we might call ethnic minority religions, so things, imported things like Islam or whatever forms of Hinduism or anything. But are we also talking about new religious movements? I mean, anything in the kind of esoteric or New Age kind of milieu? When you have dominant one major religion, so the other religions are minority religions. Indeed, all of them. So within minority religions, you can see the largest minority religion, Orthodox Church. Of course,
which is of course related to ethnical minority as well. Yeah. Then there is Old Believers, which is also ethnically Russian-speaking part of population.
Now, is that the breakaway lineage of the Catholic Church?
No, Old Believers is actually the schism of Orthodox Church. It happened when Tsar initiated church reform, Orthodox Church reform, and there was the schism within Orthodox Church. And at that time, because Lithuania was a part of Russian Empire at that time, these groups, they were persecuted by Tsar regime, so they were going on the outskirts of the empire. And Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, they were on the outskirts. So, both three countries of the Baltic states, they have these quite visible minorities of Old Believers, which at that time, they were mainly rural dwellers coming with their families and settling here in order not to be visible, and not to be persecuted anymore. So Old Believers. Then we have interesting visible minorities that were brought in by our Grand Duke Vytautas, like Karaites and Tatars from Crimea, because Lithuania at one point in the 14th century was as big as the territory was as big as it had on one side the Baltic Sea and on the other side Black Sea. Right. So Grand Duke Vytautas invited these minorities, Tatars and Karaites, to join country. So when I say Tatars, this means that Sunni Muslims are minority religion in Lithuania,
and then, for a long time,
time, almost 600 years, yeah. And then we have Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventists, the Pentecostal Baptists, Mennonites, So it's a wide range, and of course Lutherans and Reformed, who are also more than 400 and 500 years in Lithuania.
Yeah, wow. So we're talking about quite a complex situation. We have a lot of different groups, some of which are tied to ethnic identities as well. Yeah. Then we have this overarching power imbalance of and which seeks to actively affect religion. It's really a fascinating case study. Tell us how it changed after the breakup of the Soviet Union.
Well, what happened after the breakup of Soviet Union is, I think that first of all, religion came back to the public sphere. So the groups, churches, different denominations, they started to showing themselves and saying, well, we are here. We were here during all the time. We were in different our underground activities, but we are here. So the churches started registering, started establishing their relationship with the state, and new constitution was adopted, which says that that state acknowledges so-called traditional religious communities, and registers others religious communities, and there is a list of so-called traditional religious communities.
Okay.
And many minority religions are behind the boundaries of that list.
I see.
So I would say that, again, when you see the current religious situation, it is, again, dominated by Roman Catholic Church. And it's quite maybe understandable because it represents a majority of population who declares that they are Roman Catholics. Though being sociologist, I'm also asking, what does it mean being Roman Catholic?
Of course, yeah.
and this tells me that those people who really think that they are Roman Catholic and that practice Roman Catholicism, live according to the values of Roman Catholicism, are minority within this group of majority Roman Catholics. So this is about what I can say about Roman Catholicism. Yeah.
Just before we move on to other traditions, are the numbers roughly the same as they were before the Soviet era, or is it more secular? I mean,
it's roughly the same. Roughly the same. During Soviet times, we cannot be very. You cannot rely very much on the data that comes from Soviet Union. Times because when you ask a population during Soviet times, are you a believer?
It's maybe dangerous to answer.
That's maybe dangerous to answer. So we can see that, for instance, the number of believers grow from 90s to 99. You can see the visible growth. So this meant that population became more liberal, and they could disclose that they were believers. So they finally understood that now it's time to say that we are believers. So I think the number in 90s was about 57 people, 57% of population who said that they are believers, and in 99 it was 75, and since then it grew a bit.
Well, that is a high figure.
Yeah.
Okay, so. What about the other kind of... We've already talked that there was some minority religions are still sort of sub rosa so far, but presumably in this more open... They're pushing, perhaps, for more public prominence. Would that be correct?
Yes, they are, but I would say that I agree with observations of other sociologists who focus on this region of Eastern and Central Europe, that actually what the communist period did actually was that that population somehow realized that there should be monopoly. You know, that there should be monopoly in the worldview, so that everyone can somehow join it and be safe.
Yeah,
You know?
I understand.
So the idea of pluralism, the idea of diversity,
It's
becomes
resisted.
a challenge. A challenge. You know,
Mm-hmm.
people say, "Why do we need it?" You know, it's okay. We have one church, and everything is clear in this case. Let's move to other question. You know, but of course, you know, in a liberal democracy, you have different worldviews, different faiths, and different beliefs. So.
And this idea of finding security in that, you know, one overarching kind of narrative, it's maybe even more important in a country that's in a sort of slightly uncertain position in terms of its borders, you know, with two different kinds of empires almost, well, literally in one case. And, you know, that need to have stability is perhaps greater than it is on the margins of Europe where, you know, where they're relatively wealthy and relatively stable.
Yeah. I mean, our geographical position is really unfavorable for us very much. So this of course gives population ground for some need to search for stability, at least in some places of some parts of their everyday life. So church seems to be like one of those spots, shelters maybe.
But then
secure.
interestingly, though, in quite a cultural sense. So you say, I mean, compared to some other countries in that area, the Lithuanians Lithuanian Catholics are less pious and less attending church and things. But still strongly identifying with that collective identity.
Yes, and I think that they identify with this, and they kind of don't disagree. What, for instance, religious and political elites, how they are acting and what kind of decisions they are making. Because, for instance, a few days ago, Lithuanian Parliament has adopted a very conservative artificial insemination law, which is again a project of church.
I'm guessing that there's not high levels of immigration. Would that be correct?
Immigration?
Into Lithuania.
Yeah, it's very little, and so far, if to speak about the refugee crisis in Europe, I think maybe just a few tenths have arrived of refugees to Lithuania.
Interesting. Have you seen any signs of what we could, for want of a better term, call religious innovation in this period of where religion is suddenly allowed to be spoken of again? Have you seen any signs of new forms or new sort of public expressions of religion?
Well, yes, and at the same time, when you start investigating these new forms, you can see that they have also their history. For instance, you know, we've been speaking about underground religious activities during Soviet times, but when I was doing research into contemporary Hinduism, I realized that even some kind of spiritual activities like yoga, meditations were also taking place during Soviet times. One of my informants told me that, you know, although authorities were quite skeptical and suspicious about different religious activities, they were not so suspicious about people gathering together in the factory for yoga and for meditation. They thought this is not a very much religious activity. But from those activities, people come to came to this independent period, and they brought these ideas with them. So now they are participating in different contemporary Hindu movements. They participate in different activities of New Age milieu. So there is a kind of trace that you can see that it also comes. Because I also must say that Soviet Union was a very large country.
Yeah.
There were so many things in there, so many different traditions, so many cultures. And although it was very much closed for the western part of the world, it was not so closed for the so-called third world, India and other, Afghanistan and Pakistan and Iran.
And China as
And
well,
China,
I guess. Yeah.
Mongolia was very also,
course, yeah.
So all those ideas, which now we see that they are, for instance, we may say this is a New Age milieu, but differently from West, it did not came from California and from West,
Yes.
It came from other side.
It came directly. That's really interesting because, of course, even in communist China, I mean, those kind of actually organizing meditation, Tai Chi, yoga, these kind of things found quite a comfortable place within communism because they weren't seen as religious.
Yeah.
And so it would have been perfect sense for them to get exported through the Soviets.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, Soviet authorities were really in deep conflict with religion, but I would also say that with the religion that had Western relations, like Roman Catholic Church, and also Protestant churches, which had their roots behind the Western boundary of Soviet Union. But otherwise, Orthodox Church, although really also experienced some persecution, though it was kept closer and did not, well, at the same time, for instance, Muslims, they were not so much persecuted as Catholics and Protestants and as I mentioned, other.
I'd like to kind of bring us up to the present, and because one thing that's been missing, we've talked a lot about the religious groups and the religious authority and the power, but what we haven't talked about is the study of religion. Because, I mean, that was kind of repressed at the same time as religion was, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. And, study of religions in Lithuania, I would say that in the first, during the times of First Republic of Lithuania, it was mainly the faculties of theology, and actually one faculty of theology. Lithuania then had a smaller territory, it was really a much more smaller country than it is now. So there was one faculty of theology, which was closed when the Soviets came, and since then there were introduced during Soviet times. There were introduced the scientific atheism classes in universities, which, as my informants told me, were actually interesting and challenging. And I had interviews with people who were born in the rural areas of Lithuania, and then they came during Soviet times to study in the cities. And they said that coming from traditional milieu to university and hear some critique of religion was actually, they enjoyed it. It was challenging because it was also something that made you think.
Maybe the first time they'd ever encountered a different view.
Yes, to think, to reevaluate, to reflect upon what is your background. What are you doing? Why are you doing this or that? Why is your behavior this or that? So there was a study of scientific atheism. Some of my informants, I can rely only on this research so far. They told that some teachers were good. Later, the situation changed, but after Soviet Union collapsed, study of religions was reintroduced to Vilnius University. In 1993, the Center for the Study of Religions was created, and it is there up until now. They have a study program master study program of the science of religion. They are mainly focusing on their expertise is philosophy of religion.
Right.
What at the beginning they have made some really interesting empirical research into religious situation of the country. Was it 1994, maybe 1996 years? But then they changed the focus, and I guess that's it. Vytautas Magnus University has a faculty of theology also, but it's mainly theology faculty. There are no study of religions as we would understand it.
What's been the reception of the study of religion in such a devoutly Catholic or majority Catholic country? Because I know in other countries we'll be speaking to James Capello this year as well about setting up in Cork with a very strong Catholic kind of presence, and I know that this in Russia as well, study of religion is now just really taking off. So what was the relationship with the state and the public?
The relationship is kind of clear for everybody, because if you study religion, the definition of religion is Roman Catholicism.
Right.
What is religion in Lithuania? It's Roman Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. So when you study religion, you study Roman Catholic Church. As being sociologist, I can still say that I study religion, but I study religion as a social institution, and that's why it's religion, not plural religions.
Yeah.
But I would rather make this emphasis on plurality, because then people somehow start thinking, oh, religions. There are more religions, isn't it? So yeah, we that's what we also emphasized in the name and in the activities of Lithuanian Society for the Study of Religions. We emphasize religions, so then people hear that it's plurality.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And you're now members of the EASR as well, aren't you?
We are members.
Yeah, great.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
I'm going to wrap it up there. I mean, that's a really interesting, not only just to get the specific details of these different contexts, because they're all different and they all tell us something about how people identify, but just to get this historical sweep and this institutional aspect at the end. So, Milda, thank you so much for being on the Religious Studies Project.
Thank you.
Excellent to hear that interview, David. Milda's also written a piece for you for the BASR Bulletin on similar topics, hasn't she?
Indeed, it's part of a series we have in the Bulletin called From Our Correspondent, where I invite people from far-flung parts of the globe to report back to the UK professional RS people on the state of the industry, for want of a better word, in different places in the world, the different institutional contexts and how that affects, job market and research prospects and all the rest of it.
So if you're in one of those other contexts other than the UK, you might want to consider getting in touch with David for that.
Please do, yeah.
On that note, that interview was recorded at the EASR, and David was obviously at the EASR recording that, but he was also there representing the RSP, and he spoke to the committee of the EASR.
I did. In fact, I presented the RSP to the committee of the EASR with a proposal that we work with the EASR to better promote European scholarship, so non-Anglophone European scholarship, particularly in places like Eastern Europe, and where it's relatively new field and relatively little heard from in the Anglophone speaking countries. So they agreed that this was a good idea, and so we are going to have 2 RSP reporters at the EASR conference every year from now on, to make sure that we get a good batch of interviews representing for the European countries. So again, if you're going to be at EASR next year and you haven't heard enough, from where you are, then get in touch and we can set that up.
Yeah, and indeed, I would probably say that the whole of Europe could do with getting heard from better on the RSP. We tend to feature Finland quite a lot.
Well,
in comparison,
that's because they're very easy to work with.
So yeah, we would love to do that. I am a little bit delirious today because I've just printed off my PhD dissertation. So fingers crossed.
So congratulations, Chris. And I can hear,
now, yeah.
if I listen, I can just hear applause coming from drifting in through the window from all parts of the world. So sincerely well done.
Well, we'll wait for the Viva.
I'm sure you'll be fine.
That's the next hurdle, but I'm incredibly relieved.
So we'll be expecting to hear a lot more from Chris in the coming months.
Exactly. You'll hear from me next week, actually, because I was speaking to Don Llewellyn, or Llewellyn, as I try and pronounce it, in the interview. And we spoke at Socrel at Lancaster University, and it's the second in our Socrel series, and we spoke about religion and feminism broadly. So it's a very interesting interview and quite broad-ranging, and great to have Dawn fully involved in the RSP. She's been one of our major supporters, and she's participated in roundtables and facilitated us coming down to Chester. It's great to have her actually on the podcast as a bona fide interviewee.
Absolutely. So come back for that next Monday. Come back for the response to this interview on Thursday. Don't forget that you can support the Religious Studies Project by using our amazon.co.uk.com and .ca links. That gives us a cut of everything you buy, not only religious studies material, at no expense to you, and it's a great way to support the project. You can follow the project on iTunes, Facebook, Google+, YouTube, Twitter. Have I forgotten anything?
Those are the only ones we know about. If we have another social media account, someone else is running it.
Yeah, and
It's a scam. Don't send them money.
don't give them money, but do feel free to like the posts. But other than that, Chris,
Thanks for listening.